you go down further, a little bit further, there's a revolving section for gravity experiments. So that's that would be a section where they could change up the speed of that thing, which would, very, very.
That's cool.
This is not like artificial gravity, of course. This is a little older tech than that, but it's just a way of creating that. Was my thinking of the day. And then below that is the factory, and then below that is the power core, basically, which was totally eliminated from the model when they started filming. So, but it was added back in when they flipped the whole thing upside down and made it the space station, regular one or whatever that was.
And we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah.
So since you basically answered the next question, I'll ask a new question. So this facility, you never really get I know you'll see the pod leaving, but you don't get a true sense of scale. And the way of describing it with this big open space and how much vegetation's in the top bit, it feels something larger to me. What sort of crew might be on this facility? And is it a good assignment? You're going to spend years working maybe this facility, or is it a quick thing? Do you think? I don't know, because it seems like you've built in some nice areas to sort of chill, so it feels less work, or at least longer term stay.
Well, obviously, if you're a well-rested crew, you're going to
be more productive.
You're going to be more productive for sure. So they would probably be divided up into a 3-shift rotation, where you'd be on for a third of the 24 hours and then off for the rest. And so you've got to have a lot of free time on your hands.
And would it be mostly crew in the facility, or is it mostly people coming on and off temporary stay as they go to other starships and such, do you think?
Unknown whatevers up there, and that could very easily have, hotels, have living facilities for people that were changing out crews on the starship. That would be temporary housing for crews that have to get off of the ship so that they could work on it. You know what I'm saying? If a Navy ship comes into dock, the crew, in most cases, especially if it's in dry dock, comes off of the ship so that the work personnel can deal with the ship without everyone being in the way.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that the top part was kind of an observation station for the dry dock facilities. How big of a room did you see that being, and exactly what was the purpose of that very top part on top of the tanks?
That was the dockyard control. So
dockyard control, yeah.
That's like an airport control tower, basically. As far as scale, you'd have to go back down to. I didn't measure everything out specifically because there wasn't really any time for that or need. But if you basically take a scale from one of the docking ports, then you can pretty well scale it up. I've got a side view of the station, which I sent you, and it's a pretty good sized station. But a couple 100 feet tall, maybe. I don't know. I've never scaled it out. Interesting.
Okay.
So we've already talked about how the original idea for the travel pods was to have interchangeable sections that you say broke away, similar to the Suliban Helix from Enterprise. So at what point was this changed then to be the travel pods, and how did you feel moving away from that really interesting concept?
You have a couple of little paintings here showing the travel pod actually departing from its office. And the idea in this initial concept was that there would be an office attach point at the back and a docking port at the front, offset from the main window. And Gene saw that, and he said, no, he says, we only have one docking port, it's on the back. It's like, well, that would have been good to tell me. So the design of the travel pod, then the front part still mimics the look of the office units, but then the back squares off to be able to house that docking port, that docking ring, as it were. So my first question to Gene was, well, okay, you have these doors. How does it open when it's docked? And Gene says, well, the ship that it docks into just pulls the doors open. So, okay. So then what that led to was then when I designed the ship, I had the docking rings, and now I know that the doors have to slide within a slot that's in the ring. So then I designed grippers that would actually attach from, let's say, the Enterprise, attach to the door and slide the travel pod doors open once it was hard docked into the Enterprise. Of course, that doesn't answer the question. It's like, well, how do you get in or out when it's not docked? Obviously, the doors would have to come apart a little bit, not enough to fall out, but a little bit, so you could get in and out. Again, the logic of that was something that I don't necessarily subscribe to, but it was what Gene wanted, so I tried to give him what worked.
So you mentioned too that there's a fabrication facility and factories located in the lower section where they'd actually extrude parts out as they constructed them. Do you think the majority of the Starship parts for the dry dock were constructed there, or did you see another complex, maybe much like the space dock that we see in Star Trek 3 being in orbit as well, where the majority of the construction happened and then the ship got moved to the dry dock for final fitting and assembly? Or do you think that this was the primary fabrication facility?
This was just a repair facility in my mind. So any large components like full nacelles or anything like that would be built on Earth and beamed up, just like the orbital facility of that built the D over. So basically, components in the universe, as I understood it back then, components were built on Earth, not necessarily in Iowa, more like San Francisco. And then the components it was disassembled. They were like prefab components. They were then beamed into orbit and reassembled.
Cool. But a question just occurred to me though. Did you see this station being the only one of its type in orbit, or were there several in different parts of Earth's rotation, perhaps to each service different construction yards and zones?
I think I saw this as one of several orbiting complexes. On one of my work bee diagrams, I have the operator wearing a uniform with an arm patch on it, and it's labeled as complex. I think it's complex. I can't read it because this is a low-res image. Probably complex 7. So I now have to check that. But yeah, I envision more than one space office complex. So this particular work bee in this drawing was attached to complex, whatever the number, 7. Cool. So yeah, there would be more than one space office complex, each complex having more than one dry dock.
Now, did you see just dry docks as assembly areas, or did you see, I guess not at the time, but did you picture something bigger like space dock, where you could actually fly into it? No?
Never did.
But looking back now, based on Star Trek 3, do you think that space dock was in existence at the same time as the motion picture? Or do you think it got built between the motion picture and Star Trek 3?
Yeah, it did, because it's way larger than the space office complex.
Oh yeah.
and its ensuing dry dock. So yeah, it would be built after. Okay. We won't go into the particular logic of the space station design, but I see it as being built after.
So as we discussed earlier in this episode, this station is more of a way station for the dry dock facilities. Now, because it is so modular and relatively small, did you see this as something that could in fact be temporary while the Enterprise was under her refit, to think these sort of space stations were purpose-built for new constructions or moved around Earth's orbit to different construction yards if need be?
I never saw these as manufacturing centers. They're repair facilities, So, there could conceivably be orbiting factories that I know nothing about. It would conceivably, I didn't actually design it into it, but it could conceivably have maneuvering thrusters that would reposition it in a different orbit. Actually, that would be pretty logical to add in, just in case the orbit decayed, or if they needed to put it somewhere else, they could just move it by itself. I recently not recently, but about a year or so ago, I did a redesign of Deep Space Nine, and a lot of the parameters around that station were dictated by the writers. So I did not totally design it for my own imagination, but within that space station, I did actually build in major thrusters to reposition that station because it's a deep space station. So it was done for a series of books, and I'm sure you've seen it. Doug Drexler and DAG 3D was part of that, putting that all together. But in hindsight, it would have been good to add thrusters to the space office complexes as well.
Now, we never saw Earth or any orbital facilities around Earth during the TOS era, and this has a very different feel and look from TOS things that we have seen. So, do you see this as being relatively new to the motion picture time frame, or do you think these were in existence when the Constitution class was getting constructed, not destructed?
And it is worth saying, obviously, now that Enterprise, the prequels come out, the technology is more rustic and plated and more detailed, just like the motion picture style. So the fact that it's an Earth orbit facility could actually mean it's older because it doesn't need to have the same design cues as the sleek TOS, interstellar craft. So what are your thoughts on the age of this vehicle and the space station? Could it have existed in TOS or even be old?
I didn't actually see it as being from the TOS era. I saw it as being actually put into orbit just a few years before the motion picture Enterprise. So it would have, in that timeline, it would have gone up after the TOS era.
So you think it was then put up for the refit? This was the facility that was meant to, be in charge of the refit?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it, maybe 10 years before. Just, because the refit had to be refitted someplace, and this complex was already in place.
10 years before the motion picture, that was still during the 5-year mission, I believe.
Yes.
Doesn't the refit take 3 years? Kirk had been an admiral for 3 years by the time of the motion picture.
But you've got to remember the TOS Connie is already 40 years old, so that design is a long, long way back, and we never see Earth. So
I'm just saying the station was being built kind of at the end of the 5-year mission era.
Yeah.
Possibly then, so.
There you go.
So now we know that for Star Trek 2, your design was used again, but it was turned upside down. They used it upside down. I've always wondered, what do you think of that design, or fair to say variant? And were you talked about at all before this was put into place for the movie?
Is it politically correct to say stupid?
On our show, it's your opinion, so let's go with that.
It's my opinion. First of all the windows now are at the lower part of the wall, so people would have to drop to their knees to look out the windows. It's clever.
Yeah.
It's such an obvious reuse of a model. I mean, oh my gosh, it just didn't actually work for me.
But lastly, what is your favourite and least favourite thing about the orbital space complex? And is there anything you would change if you got the chance for a version 2?
I really can't think of anything that I would change on it. Obviously, that spinning gravity section wouldn't be needed if I had actually thought out the artificial gravity part of all of this. But I saw that part of the space station the complex as being more of like a research facility. So you would not only have the ability to service starships, but it would also have part of the complex would be a facility where people could do research on these different space stations. So so that was just part of my thinking was to make it more, not a play on words, make it more complex, make it more useful to a variety of tasks. But yeah, I would therefore add some thrusters to it. I would probably also, if I haven't, I was looking in my earlier drawings and didn't see, but I would probably add some of those docking rings up near dockyard control. I would probably have lifeboats placed around the facility in case they had to abandon that thing really quick. So, but shape-wise, logic-wise, I'd probably keep it the same, just based on what it was needed for. It was needed for a bunch of offices, and engineering offices and some living facilities. I'd probably cut down the number of offices and increase the number of living facilities. Probably my favorite part would be the recreational ring above all the other levels. My least favorite thing would be the fact that they left my power core off of the thing when they shot it. As far as least favorite design element, I don't really have one. Maybe the factory in some way could be reconfigured, but I call it a factory. It's really just an area to fabricate replacement parts, basically. So you just put nowadays you just put a bunch of 3D printers around there, right? And they just be kicking out parts no matter what.
Pretty much, yeah. Well, guys, I think that's it for this episode. Quite an interesting episode filled with a lot of things that I certainly didn't know before. Also, great insights from Andrew as well, as always. So thanks for joining us again today, Andrew.
You're very welcome.
And obviously, guys, please click that like and subscribe button and visit us on Trekyards.com or over to our Patreon if you want to support the show. But you'll see us next week. So until next time, I'm Connor Coggins.
I'm Captain Foley.
And Andrew.
Live long and prosper, everybody.
Thanks.